Great. Well, welcome everyone. Great to have you with us at this GMAT Club and Fortuna admissions session on applying in round two. It's great to have you with us. My name's Bill Kooser. I am a director at Fortuna Admissions and also former associate dean at the University of Chicago Booth School of Business, where I spent nearly 30 years in a variety of capacities. So it's great to have you with us, and looking forward to having a chat about applying to the M7 schools in round two.
And I'm Rachel Erickson Hee, and I was a Stanford Business School interviewer for many years, and now I work at Fortuna with Bill, helping people with their business school applications. So I think we're going to just dive right into it, give you a little bit of an introduction in terms of what are schools looking for, some general information, and then going through the specific M7 schools one by one, giving you some tips and hints for how to tackle their applications. So first of all, what are the schools looking for? Let's just jump ahead to that slide if we can, Bill. Yep. Thank you. Okay, first thing they're looking for is a strong academic background, especially in terms of quantitative ability. And the reason for this focus on quantitative ability is not because they don't care about the qualitative pieces. They do very much. It's just that on the quantitative side, these programs are very rigorous. They're also rigorous on the qualitative side, but there is a certain threshold of quantitative ability that you just have to have in order to succeed at these programs. And so they're looking for demonstrated evidence that you can handle that. Whereas with the qualitative, there are many, many, many ways to prove that you have those abilities. You don't need a particular background or training in a subject. It's about your ability to learn and to grow. The next is they're really looking for your career experience, for career progression and accomplishments. And it's not so much about what companies you've worked for. It's really much more about what you've done at those companies and how you have stepped up, how you have managed situations, dealt with difficult challenges, and made a difference and an impact. The third thing that they are looking for is your interest and engagement in the community, because they really want people who care about the community, who care about the world that they're in, and they really want people who have made a difference in all of the communities or any of the communities that they have been part of. Next is evidence of team and interpersonal skills. Once again, this is obviously very important for showing those leadership abilities and those interpersonal skills that make for good managers. So you want to show times in the past when you have been a leader, when you have stepped up and done the things that they're asking for. And then personality and cultural fit. And what I would say here is that's less this type of applicant should go to this type of school, this type of applicant is a fit at this type of school. I think personally business schools are tending to look for similar things, but they are looking for people whose personality makes them a good fit for business school, who are going to be engaged, who are going to be positive forces, who are going to make a difference on campus, who are going to contribute. Bill might have a different perspective on that. I'd love to hear it. But I do think, once again, it's not about a certain type of student should go to this school and a certain type of student should go to that school, as opposed to showing that you're just somebody who's going to be a great personality and fit at any of these schools. Next is the ability to communicate, which they look at across your application. It comes through the letters of recommendation and then obviously the interview. So make sure that your application communicates your ability to communicate well. And then finally, a clear sense of your career goals and why an MBA is important to getting you there and why you need it. I'm going to turn it over to Bill now to talk a little bit about round two.
Yeah. So just following up on some of Rachel's comments here, one of the things that's important, even though we're going to go through and talk about each of the M7 schools in particular, they're all looking for these kinds of things. So any of the things that might be different from one school to another in terms of what they might be looking for, those are all at the margin. You have to hit these things first to be considered a good candidate for any of the M7 schools. So if we talk about round two, so first of all, it's not a disadvantage. I mean, many people will ask me, oh, should I wait till round one next year? No, not if you're ready to go now. Round two and round one are very, very similar, if not identical, in terms of the competitiveness, the ability to be admitted in either of those rounds. Yes, when it comes to round three or beyond, it gets a little dicier because some of the seats are filled up. But round two is every bit as good a deadline to hit as round one. But the key thing is, are you ready to apply? You don't want to rush an application. We typically suggest 3 months to prepare all of the work that goes into building a great, strong application. That requires a lot of introspection, a lot of reflection, a lot of editing of essays. So you want to make sure that your application is a solid one, that it is ready to go. You don't want to rush it if at all possible. So the idea is not to worry about so much about the dates, but when is your application ready and the best that it can be. The other thing to remember, though, about round two is that the holidays fall right in the middle of it. So as you're preparing for deadlines that might be in the early part of January, you've got Christmas deadlines, you've got Hanukkah deadlines, you've got New Year's, you've got potentially Thanksgiving, all sorts of things that might get in the way of spending as much time on the applications as you might like. So keep that in mind as you're thinking about your schedule, thinking about the timelines that you're going to set to prepare all the various materials for your application. So now we're going to go very, very quickly through some of the specifics for each of the M7 schools.
All right. So I'm going to start off with Harvard. And the first thing I want to say about Harvard is that it is a very concise application that is focused on leadership and growth. They give you 3 jobs. It doesn't matter if you've had 7, you're only allowed to talk about 3. They give you 3 extracurriculars. Doesn't matter how many you've done, 3 awards. So for Harvard, you really need to think about what are the most important, most impressive things that I've done, and spend that time to pare them down and communicate as effectively as possible everything that you have done for them. That's one thing to keep in mind with the HBS application. The next thing to know is that Harvard wants leadership and they want authenticity, not why HBS. Out of all of the schools, Harvard is the one that cares the least about you telling them why Harvard is a great institution. They want to know about you. They don't want to know that you know about Harvard. With that in mind, what you should do is you should focus on personal growth, decision-making, and your leadership impact. And you should use specific examples to show how you've made a difference in your roles. So now I want to talk a little bit about those essays that you see, the business-minded essay, the leadership essay, and the curiosity essay, to explain how to incorporate those things. For all 3 of these are very short, very tight essays. And I think that it is often helpful to focus on one story for each of these. Don't try to tell too much. Don't try to communicate a lot. Have it be a great example of where you showed leadership, a great example of why you have your career vision and the difference it's going to make, a great example of curiosity on your part and what that led to. And then finally, you don't want to waste too much time addressing all of the elements of the prompt because the prompts are a little bit complex. So for example, I'm just going to read the business-minded essay 1. It's, please reflect on how your experiences have influenced your career choices and aspirations and the impact you will have on the businesses, organizations, and communities you will serve. One thing you should know there is you do not have to explicitly address how you are going to have an impact on the businesses and the organizations and the communities. Talk about what you're going to do, and then just a brief sentence at the end to tie it to that prompt. But focus on you, not on answering all of the specific details of the questions for the prompt. And that's sort of just a little bit of a quick advice on how to approach those essays. Bill, I think you're gonna.
So if we jump on to CBS, at CBS is a little bit different. Their questions are a little broader and a little more, in some ways, traditional than what you've found with Harvard. One thing I do want to say is the first bullet point there talks about the 2 short answer questions. One is on the career goal, and one is how you're going to spend your summer. But more broadly, I want to remind you all that one of the key things you should do as you're beginning your applications is to go through the entire online application to identify any short answer questions that might be in that application. All too often, we work with clients who have spent an awful lot of time working on the main essays, and they get down to about a week before the deadline and realize, oh, there are 3 or 4 short answer questions I have to respond to as well. And oftentimes those require as much thought, oftentimes because they're short, as the main essays. So one of the things I encourage everyone to do is take a look at the entire application, go through every single section of it to identify key questions that you might have to respond to, things that I call hidden essays. So in terms of Columbia's, one, they're asking about career goal. What do you want to do long term? And how are you going to spend your summer? They are 50 characters in length, so there's not a whole lot of room. And it's just really for them to kind of get a very quick snapshot of what your plans are and that you have thought through what the next step is going to be, particularly that coming up summer. So main essay, as with many schools, is a career goal-oriented essay. And for any career goal-oriented essay, one of the key issues to remember is, why do you have that as your career goal? What is it that you hope to accomplish? What impact do you want to have? What problems do you want to solve? So it's not simply about, I want to be a consultant, I want to be an investment banker, I want to be a product manager in a tech firm. It's kind of, well, why do you want to do that? What do you hope to do in that role? And why has it become important to you? So in this essay, you need to spend a bit of time talking about the why. You need to spend a bit of time talking about what have you done so far to prepare you for that role. And then, as Columbia puts it, what is your dream job, the long-term job? Where are you shooting for? How is the MBA and your prior experience coming together to prepare you for something you'd like to do in the 10 to 15 year time frame? And when they say dream job, I think there's a tendency, and I fall into this as well, to kind of really put on the imaginary hat and think, oh, well, I'd love to be a point guard in the NBA, or I'd really like to be, something. What they're really looking for here is, what is your long-term career goal? Not something that's completely blue sky, but something that is reasonable, that has that fits with what you've done to date, and again, where you have a reasonable rationale for why that makes sense. The second essay is focused on a variety of issues in diversity and inclusion. You get to pick one of 5 or 6 different items and explain how you have helped foster those ideas in your current company, or in your volunteer work, or in your community. Again, more and more schools are looking at these issues to kind of get a sense of, how do you deal with people who are different from you? How do you bring others along? How do you support and encourage people regardless of their circumstance? So again, bringing specific examples, showing exactly what you've done, and talking a bit about what you learned from that experience and how it has shaped you and how it's going to impact your involvement at CBS. And then finally, the third essay is, how are you going to co-create your MBA experience? And this is a slightly different wording from the past. This idea of co-creating your experience is an important distinction. It's not simply, what are you going to take, but rather, how are you going to use your own initiative to create an experience that is unique to you? How are you going to take advantage of the coursework, the academics, the special programs, the guest speakers, the opportunities to explore New York City as part of your 2 years at CBS? So thinking hard about how you are going to take advantage of all those resources, bring them together, and build a really unique program that fits what you want to do with your life, and as well as in your career. So you want to show how the global network at CBS is going to influence you. You're going to show how New York is an important element of going to CBS, and how you can take advantage of all the resources, speakers, companies, cultural events that New York has to offer. And you want to hone in on your adaptability and innovation. CBS has a very strong entrepreneurial connection there. And how are you going to be part of this very dynamic and energetic environment? And again, as with any of the schools, you want to link your particular ambitions to the particular strengths of the school, and CBS in particular focuses heavily on kind of being in New York and being a very entrepreneurial culture. So how does your experience lean into that, and how are you going to take advantage of that in building your career today? So moving on to Stanford.
Yes, and for Stanford, I just want to say I love, Bill, your idea of the hidden essays, because Stanford has 4 hidden essays, and they're big ones.
Yep.
So Stanford's application, the very first question, which is they give you 1,200 characters, which is about 200 words. What is your background? And that's a great chance for you to set up the whole scene for your application, to share something about yourself, where you came from, where you came from has motivated you to do certain things. So take advantage of that. And then at the end of the application form, they have these 3 technically optional, but we highly, highly, highly recommend that you answer them, questions about the impact that you've had on organizations that you've been involved with. And what I would say here is a couple of things. First, you need to be very clear about the impact. What was the difference that you've made? That's what they're looking for. Second, it needs to be about you, not your group, not your team. Sometimes I read those essays and I see that there's a bunch of we's, and I'm like, no. I want to know what it is that you did on that team that allowed your team to have this fantastic result or accomplishment and the difference that was made. So take those very seriously, and really spend the time to make sure to get those right, because if you don't show in those impact essays that, and in the Stanford application overall, that you have the work experience and the qualities and the accomplishments, and that you've made that difference that they're looking for, then the essays are not going to be able to save you. What I want to say about the essays is, for Stanford, they really ask you to switch gears with the first essay. The question there is, what matters most to you and why? And they want you to put all of the, like, I did this, I'm fantastic, blah, 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 in those impact essays and in the application and on the resume. And now when you get to the essay, they want you to leave it behind. They want you to actually reflect on who you are and be vulnerable and share who you are as a person, what you will be like in the community. So you really have to have both the professional and the personal for the Stanford application. And then when you get to the Why Stanford essay, it's not just Why Stanford. It's first and foremost, like the Columbia essay, it's what is your career vision and why is this something that you are drawn to? And then why do you need an MBA to do it? And then finally, how does Stanford align with your personal and professional vision? And when you're talking about the MBA and when you're talking about Stanford, remember that you're really using that as a vehicle to share more about who you are. So, you need to be very clear and very specific about where you need to grow and why, what talents, skills, knowledge, abilities you need for this future career. And then you can tie the Stanford courses and programs, clubs, et cetera, into how it will give you that information. Don't just talk about Stanford. And then finally, the Stanford application really does value authenticity, explaining your motivation and your values. They're really seeking to know the whole person. It is, of all of the schools, the most comprehensive, the biggest essay, the most writing. It's just massive. So do keep that in mind when you're tackling it, and spend the time to put all those pieces together into a package that really reflects who you are and all of the elements of who you are.
So Chicago booth. Chicago, the application to Chicago booth is unique in one aspect. The University of Chicago Booth School of Business is the only school that I'm aware of that has trademarked its educational philosophy. They call it the Chicago approach. And I encourage any of you that are thinking about applying to Chicago Booth to learn more about the Chicago approach. The school is very proud of that. They talk about it a lot on the website. It is the core and the foundation of everything that the school does. So understanding what it is, how it affects you, whether it aligns with your own educational philosophy and approach, is very, very important as you're preparing your application for Chicago Booth. So focus on the Chicago approach idea. So first essay, again, pretty straightforward, very similar to Columbia's in a lot of ways. How will Chicago Booth help you achieve your career goals? So obviously you need to talk about what your career goals are. Again, the why behind the career goal is incredibly important. We often suggest you could lead with a little anecdote or story that sets up the career goal. Why is this important for you? And then kind of going into what you've done to prepare for that and how you want to have your career progress over the next 5, 10, 15, 30 years. So it's a pretty much straightforward kind of, here's what I want to do and why, and here's how Booth is going to help me do it. So then it gets into the whole idea of the Chicago approach, the particular way that they teach, the courses that are available, the resources that you can take advantage of, whether that's research centers or special programs, travel abroad, what have you. The second question is, who are you outside the office? So here's a very different kind of question that gets away from your professional life and focuses or gives you the opportunity to focus more on other aspects of your life. So what do you do in the community? What do you do for fun? Are you active in sports? Are you active in theater or music? Do you regularly volunteer at the local animal shelter or what have you? They're trying to get a sense of who you are as a person. And again, being as specific about what it is that you do and why that's important to you. Again, this idea of reflection, introspection, I hope is coming through in each of our conversations here about the schools. It's not simply throwing down some ideas that might be based on your resume, but rather thinking deeply about, why do I do what I do? And why do I want to go in a particular direction? Why is the MBA important to me? And all these other aspects of my life, what have I learned from them and where do I want to take them? So thinking deeply about who are you outside the office and showing who you are through some examples is the way to tackle that essay. Booth is looking for analytical thinkers, and I don't necessarily mean quantitative thinkers, although quant skills are important, but rather people that can look at a problem, break it down into component pieces, and come up with a solution. And one of the other hallmarks of the Booth curriculum is its flexibility. So Booth is often looking for people that can navigate that flexibility, build their own curriculum that do not require someone to handhold them through a process. Booth has this wonderful opportunity to create whatever it is you'd like to do, depending on where you want to go in your career, but they're not going to handhold you through that process. So don't expect a whole lot of people coming alongside you, telling you to take this, take this, take this. So being able to demonstrate that you thrive in that kind of environment is important. And again, talking about the rigorous analytics, that's all part of the Chicago approach. How does data and the foundations of various disciplines support your career goals, and how does that resonate with your own approach to education? And as with many schools, you want to talk about strategic thinking, your problem-solving abilities. Every school is going to be looking for those. Booth in particular likes to see that. So moving on to Wharton.
Yes. So Wharton, I want to talk a little bit first about the application, because their application is a little bit different from some of the other schools we've talked about in the way it's structured and what you are given room to talk about. Wharton's application gives you a lot of space to talk about awards and recognitions, but for your job, for example, it doesn't really give you much room to talk about just here's what I did. And so with the Wharton application, one piece of advice sometimes is that when it comes to that recognitions part, you can interpret recognitions fairly loosely. An early promotion, a fantastic bonus, a really high ranking on a career evaluation. You can use those and then use that information to use the, I think, 1 to 2,000 characters that they give you to then talk about your extracurriculars or your work experience and what you've done that's great. Another area where it's a little bit tight and different also is they ask you how many people you've managed. and then they give you room to describe how you manage them. Here, once again, this does not mean you have a direct report where you did their job evaluations. If you were senior to somebody and you were informally managing them and guiding them on a task, or you were working with a client and you were helping the team upskill, you can talk about those opportunities and experiences also, which gives you room to add a little bit more context to an application that otherwise might seem a little bit tight. And then you also should keep in mind that your resume does get to do a lot of that heavy lifting for you. For every school, it should be doing a lot of that heavy lifting. And then remember, for Wharton, they do have all of that information and context about you. So Wharton has 2 essays, the career vision essay and then an essay on contributions to the community. So for the first one, Wharton does value specific career goals, and then they also want to really know specifically how you will contribute to the school community. Unlike Harvard, for example, Wharton still wants to know mostly about you, but they also want to understand that you have engaged with the Wharton community in order to understand what their education is like. And then once again, it's what we've talked about, which is where you talk about your career goals, and then you can tie that back to the areas where Wharton will help you accomplish those career goals, where you still need to grow and learn. And then for the second essay, showing Wharton's culture and resources, but once again, through your lens. You're still communicating what are the 3 important things or 4 or 5 important things I want them to know about me, and then how are those important things about me going to allow me to show up in the Wharton community. So if you're somebody who is always starting new things and getting other people excited about them, give an example of a club that you're going to found at Wharton as a way to show that quality of yours, but very specifically in the Wharton community. And then finally, what I would say is that Wharton is a school where it's very helpful to engage with alumni and students so that you are able to tailor your essay to those unique strengths of Wharton's and make it specific and show that you have understood the Wharton culture. And now I think Kellogg. Bill, you're going to take us through Kellogg's application.
Let me just jump on that, engaging with alumni and students, though, because I think that's important regardless of the schools you're applying to. And not only for the purposes of the application, but for you to get a better sense of the school, the culture, and whether it's the kind of place that you would like to spend the next couple of years. So we do recommend that you, wherever possible, get in touch with students, alumni, visit the schools, if at all possible, just to get a better sense of what the place is like. So there, Kellogg. So Kellogg, very similar questions to many schools. The first one is kind of really, they talk about intentionality as the phrasing of the question, but it's really about your career goals and how does Kellogg fit into those. So again, what is it you want to do? Why do you want to do it? What's the impact you want to have? What are the problems you want to solve? And how does Kellogg help you get there? The second question is more along a difficult decision that you've made. So this one's a little bit different than some other schools, but they want to get a sense of how do you make decisions? How does your character influence your decision-making ability? And what are some of the challenges you faced? So it might be making a decision that made you look bad. So I've had clients who've talked about, they messed up on a project and had to basically come to their boss and say, this did not work the way I thought it was, and here's what I'm going to do to fix it. So the challenge here is to talk about it, the challenging decision, the issues that you faced in making that decision, the skills you brought to bear to make the decision. So your analytics, your communication, your persuasion skills, your motivation skills, and then what did you learn from that experience? And how are you going to take those learnings into Kellogg and beyond? So it's not simply the decision. I made it and I did this wonderful analysis to come up with the right answer. But what did you learn? And how is that going to influence you as a leader and a decision-making going forward? You also have the opportunity or the requirement to do a couple of video essay questions, which you will be expected to submit shortly after submitting the main application. And these are often challenging. The last few years, the first question has been pretty standard. Tell us something about you. And the second one can be a behavioral question, or often is a behavioral question. Tell me about a time you worked on a team, or tell me about a time you had a difficult coworker, or something along those lines. These are very short. They have to be to the point. They are sometimes challenging for folks because you don't get a lot of time to think about them while you're doing it. So we recommend that you spend some time ahead of time considering the kinds of questions you might get, looking at what has been asked in the past, and preparing some ideas of what you might say. And then there's a number of other logistics issues about background and lighting and that sort of thing to make sure that the video is clear and looks as close to professionally done as you possibly can make it. Some of the things that are important about Kellogg and their Kellogg essay and what they're looking for is teams and collaboration. It is a very student-focused institution. They do like to think about how do we bring students together? How do we build a community here? So your experiences in building community, in working with others, in leading teams, in being a team member are all important aspects of your application. And you want to highlight those wherever possible, in your resume, in your essays, and ultimately in your interviews. Again, showing empathy, your collaborative abilities, also very, very important. Again, thinking about Kellogg as this very, very strong, interconnected community will kind of give you an idea of the types of things that they're looking for. And then finally, as you should do with any application, is talk about how your leadership style has made an impact on your work. So whether that is a very empathetic style, a very collaborative style, it is a kind of first assistant style leadership, talk about how that has influenced what you do, how you've been successful to date, and again, how you're going to bring those skills and characteristics to the Kellogg community. So moving on, final M7 is MIT Sloan.
And it makes sense that MIT's last because their application is usually the very last one to submit. Their deadline is usually behind everybody else's by at least a week and sometimes by 2 to 3 weeks. And this is really good because the MIT application, I think of all of them, is the most unique, the most different. But the great thing about it is that if you've applied to some of these other schools, you've already figured out what you want to say about yourself, what you want to communicate, the important messages you have. And now you just kind of get to have fun playing with presenting it in a totally different and interesting manner. It's a really short application. I don't think they ask any questions about extracurriculars. It's kind of, what is your work experience? A couple other things about yourself. Boom, 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 boom. Okay, done. And then they ask you for some really interesting pieces. They also ask for a resume, but in addition to the application, the resume, they want an org chart. And one thing to keep in mind here is that this org chart does not just have to be a simple box with, the CEO, da-da-da. You should really think about showing how you engage with people at the company, or if you have a client, showing how you've engaged with people at the client. You can, I think it's 2 pages, and you can have 1 page, for example, that's on your organization. But then if you work as a consultant, you could have another page that shows how you interacted with the client. Who were you reporting to? Who were you working with to get information? Who were you training or teaching? And you can also use text boxes to try and give more context and a little bit more information about who you are and where you fit into that application. Next is the video. And the video for MIT is very short. It's only a minute, so you do not have much room to talk about yourself. But here is where you can focus on that personal element of yourself. Maybe talk about your career vision if it's something that really matters to who you are, but also really try to introduce who you are. This is the sort of that more personal, vulnerable element where you're capturing what you're like as a person. And then the cover letters where you really go into the professional. And you can advocate for yourself and a couple of the most important impressive things that you've done. that show why you're going to be a great contribution to the MIT community and also be fantastic in your professional life. And then finally, there's a background essay where, once again, you get to share a little bit more about where you came from, what you're like, what has influenced you, and putting all of those different things together. They get the same or picture of who you are, but it's just presented through very different lens and in different ways. And then if you get an interview at MIT, there are 2 pre-interview essays. The first one is a data question, and I think this one's great. They ask you to take data either from a work project that you've done or from somewhere else and present that data graphically or visually, and then write a paragraph explaining it. So this is a fantastic opportunity to show that analytical skills you have, to show how effectively you can communicate quantitative information, and then also to highlight if you've done anything that involves data and analysis, to show that level of thinking and that insight that you brought to it. And then the second question is really a question about showing your leadership style and how you work with other people. And once again, as Bill mentioned, that idea of how do you work with people with different backgrounds? Because when you think about business school, you have people from all over the world with all sorts of different experiences, all sorts of different backgrounds, and they want to know that you are going to thrive in that environment. And then they also want to know that you are going to be able to bring that ability to thrive into the workforce, where you are also going to be working with lots of different people. So use that essay to show those skills of yours. For MIT, it is really important to showcase your analytical skills and your innovative thinking with real world examples. And then obviously, if you can focus on your leadership in these data-driven environments, that is a trait that they are looking for. That's partially something that all business schools want, but MIT really gives you the chance to show how you've done it. And then finally, demonstrating your ability to creatively solve complex challenges. Once again, this is very much in keeping with the ethos of MIT, what the school and the university are looking for, and what they see as a hallmark of great leaders.
All right. So we've covered all of the M7 to give you a general sense of, and sometimes a specific sense of what they're looking for and how you can build the strongest applications for each school. But broadly across the schools, let's talk a little bit about recommendations and what those should look like. And we help as we work with our clients, we help them think through who the recommender should be and the kinds of things that you would like a recommender to say about them. So you want recommenders to be specific, talk about specific things that you have done, not talk in broad generalities, but rather point to specific examples of where you've shown leadership, where you've shown initiative, where you've shown your analytical or systems or strategic thinking ability, and the impact that you've had there. How have you had a positive impact on your company and your organization? You want them to focus on what makes you distinct beyond the specific job responsibilities. How do you stand out from the crowd? How do you compare to others who are in similar roles? And how can the school get a sense of how you're going to stack up against others who are coming in and applying to the school itself? And the schools value authenticity. So you want to make sure that your recommenders are people that know you well, that have worked with you for a significant amount of time, if at all possible, and who can speak directly to the things that you do day in and day out. So it's not all about getting a big name from a big name company who sort of knows you or is connected to your family in some way, but rather someone who works closely with you, ideally someone who has supervised you over a period of time, who can really talk about both the strengths and weaknesses that you bring and how you have grown as an employee and as a person in that organization.
And then finally, the resume and the short answer questions, or the questions on the application, those open-ended questions Bill talked about. So for the resume, I guess what I want to say is this is not a job. They're not looking for specific technical skills. They're not looking for your ability to do a particular job. It's a very different type of resume. So you need to re-scrutinize every single line on your resume to make sure that it fits with what business schools are looking for. They don't care if you know 17 different programming languages, and they don't care if you can do a waterfall analysis or the 7 different transactions you worked on and the dollar amounts of them. They want to see your impact. They want to see your strategic thinking. They want to see your insight. They want to see the times you made a difference. They want to see what that difference was. They want to see how effectively you've worked with senior people. They want to see how effectively you've worked with junior people. You want to capture all of those things still in resume format. So think for every single bullet point, what am I trying to communicate with this bullet point? Why is this actually impressive? What was important? What was challenging? What was interesting? What was significant about this work that I did? And find a way to get that across, whether it's talking about how you initiated a project to whatever, observed this, and then based on that, developed a solution and explain what that solution was. Use the resume that way to try and get across a deeper level of what you did than just the technical skills and know-how that you have to do a certain job. And then this next piece of advice goes across both the resume and the application, which is please try to avoid jargon and try to avoid industry specific language that outsiders won't understand. You don't know who's going to be reading your resume and application. And if you're a really strong candidate, it's probably going to be read by multiple people. And it's going to be potentially read by people who are not experts in your specific field. And it needs to be accessible to people outside of that. It also is just a hallmark of good communication. HBS, for example, specifically says describe your job responsibilities without using jargon or technical terms. If you can't communicate to somebody who doesn't know your job what you did, then you're not a great communicator. So really think about those questions on the application. And, once again, I want to highlight and go back to what Bill said about that these are mini essays and you need to think of them that way. And you can't use the same answers across schools. Just as a brief example, Harvard Business School gives you 250 characters to describe your roles and responsibilities in your job. Stanford gives you 320. I think Columbia Business School gives you 500, and then Chicago Booth, I think, gives you 700 characters. And so if you use the 250 character from Harvard Business School for the 700 character Chicago Booth answer, you are missing this incredible opportunity to share more about your job and what you've done. So you really have to tailor every single response to every single school. So keep that in mind when you're thinking about the workload and when you're planning it. Bill, do you have anything else to add on that?
No, I think you're absolutely right. One of the things that is a challenge is how do you adapt the basic story that you've come up with about what it is you want to do and why an MBA makes sense to each of the schools. And we've tried to give you an idea of what some of those nuances are at each school. And a way to get some more information about that is kind of sign up with Fortuna to kind of get a free consultation, which we offer to anyone to kind of get a better sense of what might you use as your story and how are you going to be viewed by an admissions committee as kind of a first step in thinking about getting some additional support from a Harvard admissions consultant. So here are some of the things that we do, and it's again possible to sign up for a free consultation with us. Rachel, what else would you offer up as something to kind of broad general perspectives that someone should take as they're thinking about applying for round 2 here?
So I would say, first of all, round 2, I think they actually sometimes get some really interesting different applicants in round 2, and the business schools are excited about that. So it is actually a great round to apply in. I have seen my clients have incredible success in round 2. There is no difference, once again, as we said earlier, between round 1 and round 2. And then I think also it's just that business schools do care about authenticity. You want to explain all the amazing things that you've done to get in, but there is no magic formula. The magic formula is being yourself, and sharing obviously the best of yourself. And that is what makes for a unique application. No numbers, no formulas, just sharing what is unique about you that makes you a fantastic contribution
Right.
to the business school community.
And one of the things that I think many people find is that it's helpful to work with a coach or someone to kind of bounce ideas off of to help you figure out what is it that makes you unique. There may be things in your background that you would not have considered to be all that unusual or all that interesting to an admissions committee, but someone coming in from the outside can help you think through some of those things and highlight some ideas and perspectives and some experiences that you've had that would actually be quite appealing, and to help you craft that story that is going to present you in the best possible light to an admissions committee.
Yeah.
So if you're thinking about round two, it's not that far away now, just a few months away. So it is time to begin to think seriously about which schools make sense for you and how to get the support you need to begin to prepare a very solid application and get the best possible result. So again, you can connect with us, but before we go more into that, we have some time for some questions. If there are some questions out there, we can try to address those in the next few minutes.
All right, I'm just looking through. So the first question is about executive MBA programs for someone with 20 years of work experience. And it's asking whether the Stanford MSX and MIT Sloan Fellows are the only programs that are relevant for an applicant with that degree of work experience. Bill, I'd love to hear your perspective on this because I think you've done a little bit more work with the executive MBA programs.
I spent a lot of years running the executive MBA program at Booth. So in terms of full-time education, those are probably the two primary ones. There are a number of part-time executive MBA programs at Booth, at Kellogg, at Wharton, and elsewhere, Columbia, that would also potentially be good, attractive places for someone with 20 years of experience. 20 years of experience is a lot of experience for any program, even executive MBA program. So the challenge there, regardless of the program you're applying to, is telling the story about why it makes sense now, how an MBA is going to help put you on a different career trajectory than you have been on already. So 20 years is a lot of experience. You've had a lot of key learnings. You've presumably accomplished a lot. How will an MBA accelerate that or change that? And what makes, why should the school consider offering you a seat in their program to enhance your career, and what are you going to bring to the program? So figure out the story, and the why is critical. If you want to go full-time, those are the two most likely spots. I have seen very, very rarely someone with that much experience get admitted to a full-time MBA program, but it doesn't happen very often. So those, if you want to go full-time, those are the ones I'd recommend. But there are many other part-time executive MBA programs that would be potentially good fits as well.
The next question is about the age limit for applicants and whether 30 years is too old to start an MBA. And what I would say here is, to some extent, it's really dependent on your work experience. Somebody who is has an MD, for example, 30 years is definitely not too old to start an MBA because they spent so much of their time in getting training. Somebody who comes from a country where you have 2 years of military experience, once again, that person is the equivalent of a 28-year-old in America. So every situation is dependent. It also there is a point where you might have too much experience for the regular MBA class, but it is very situation dependent, and sort of where you are in your particular career, what your particular story is as to why you are applying now at age 30. I have seen people, in their early 30s get admitted, but there are reasons why they were now ready for business school, but not ready a couple of years previously.
Yeah, to add to that, it also depends somewhat on what it is you hope to do. There's certain employers that will say, oh, you're coming out of an MBA program at 32. You're older than our typical associate is. We're not going to be able to drive you as hard as we might if you were 28. So the story has to make sense to the admissions committee of why now and what it is you want to do with the MBA. And again, certain industries are less likely to be interested in someone coming out first job out of MBA at 32.
The next question is somebody who has an unusual background, remote mine sites and a tech startup. Business schools are really open to all sorts of different backgrounds. They love having that diversity and variety in their class, but they want to know how it's going to fit in and how it's going to enhance the class. And by the way, this is also the sort of thing where that one-on-one consultation with Fortuna could be really helpful, because you could get into the specifics of what your background is and get some guidance as to how it makes sense to fit that in, and really have that perspective.
Yeah. So there's another question about timeframes. And Rachel, you may know, so talking about Stanford looking at time devoted to application. I've not heard that ever, but you have more Stanford experience than I do.
They do not have secret AI software analyzing how many months ago you started on your application and your resume. What they're looking for is and the person who said that, what they probably meant was the time that you devote to your application shows up in the quality of your application. And I do know, for example, that like in round 3, some of those applications are really rushed. And I see it when we get an application that's last minute. Sometimes it shows, it just sloppy mistakes, stuff is repeated in multiple places. There's not really a thoughtful story behind it. It's kind of surface level. There are occasionally really talented people who can pull an application together in a week. The one person I know who did it super last minute, he was a professional writer. He was a journalist by trade. So, that if you don't have that experience, it shows, because the quality applications are the ones that have been developed with that time, is what I would say. Bill, how about your perspective?
Yeah, no, I would agree. I mean, there's no one I know that's doing anything to kind of, he spent 3 months. I mean, it was that 3 months full time, was that 3 months, an hour a day or hour a week, that's almost an impossible thing to really assess. Quality, on the other hand, is something that admissions committees are looking at very closely. Does the story hold together? Have they put time into it? Have they made sure that the application to Booth doesn't talk about Kellogg and Wharton at the same time? Those kinds of things happen. They happen often. So time is important. You have to take this process seriously. And as I said, and the question asked, I do recommend 3 months, but we have worked with clients who've come in with a few weeks to go. Not ideal. Some folks can do that very, very well. But for the most part, the typical applicant, a couple, 3 months is really necessary to do the absolute best job possible on their applications.
And there's a really interesting question about software applications and AI tools. What I personally would say is, if you're using AI to write your essays or to create your resume, for anything more than like a spell check, grammar check, you're probably doing yourself a disservice. AI can write an essay that may superficially sound like a good essay, but it is never going to have the level of personal detail, information, and specificity that actually makes a good essay. And so whether or not they use those tools, you're not going to end up with a quality product, is the problem.
Yeah, I think in many ways, the AI tools can be very helpful, but they can also be a crutch and lead to a less than stellar application. So,
I mean, the point is, you're talking about you, and no AI program can tell the reader that story or come up with that story that shows exactly what you did at work, exactly why it was so impressive, and the exact impact that it had. By the time you've written that into the AI prompt, you might as well have just written it yourself.
Right. So it looks like one final question here, talking about work experience during a PhD program counts as full-time work experience. In my view, any work experience can count as experience. It depends on what you've learned from that experience and what you've accomplished there. I don't know if that was a question around just specific numbers of months. I always find that that's less important than what did you do, what did you learn, how did you affect other people, how did you interact with other people, and how is that going to make you a better leader, decision maker in the future? So if you did something as a PhD candidate, maybe you were teaching, maybe you were advising, all of those things could be very valuable pieces of your story that an admissions committee would really like.
Yeah, I agree. Maybe you were coming up with some really novel insights in the lab, and you were convincing your senior PhD advisor that you should try a completely different approach, and that approach ended up being a really revolutionary advance. That's a great story to tell about how you make a difference and how you make an impact in an academic organization that translates well. This is an interesting question about other schools you are considering and your priority amongst them. That's a really tricky one.
I mean, a number of schools do ask where else are you applying? And I always tell clients, be truthful. I mean, they know you're applying elsewhere. Nobody applies to just one school, so be truthful. I have never seen a school ask, how are you ranking them? Or which ones are your favorites? I've never seen that. I would hope they would not ask that, because that puts the candidate in a very, very difficult situation. And it just leads to them saying something that's not necessarily truthful. So, if they ask what other schools you're applying to, put them down. I can't imagine they're going to ask you to rank them.
And if they do, then unfortunately the answer, whatever school you're applying to, is your top choice, and have good reasons why.
Right.
Was there one last question?
We got one last question, I think.
About a paralegal?
Yeah. Can a paralegal get into a top school? Sure. It's all about the story and all about what have you learned? What do you bring to the school? What are your career goals? Again, it's presenting the admissions committee with a compelling reason that you are going to be a great student, a great member of the community, and a great alumnus of that program. And crafting that story and demonstrating what you've done to date in all your experiences and what you bring to the school is the challenging part of creating that story.
Great. This has been wonderful. Thank you for joining us. Thank you to everyone for your thoughtful and insightful questions that helped us hopefully share a little bit more about what it's like to apply to schools. And once again, if you have any questions, just go to fortunaadmissions.com /free-consultation. And one of our really talented, helpful coaches would be thrilled to talk to you more and give you some insights into your particular application process.
All right. Thanks for your time today. Really appreciate it.